Thanks very much. Hello everyone, it's very nice to see you and nice to be back at Anglia Ruskin. I haven't been here for quite a long time. Actually, I came to see one of the degree shows in the Ruskin Gallery, try to get along to those whenever possible. Usually when I give presentations and talks, I start off by telling you a little bit about myself, but actually the entire talk is probably a longer bit about myself, so I think I'll just leave that. So currently I work at the Fitzwilliam Museum, which is where I've come here from today. I lead the visitor experience team, so they are the people that you meet when you go into the galleries. And I also work as the chair of the Changemakers Action Group, which is the working group for equality, diversity and inclusion across the University of Cambridge Museums Consortium. And as well as that, I've also been doing a little bit of internal communications work recently as well. I think a general theme is that I like to have a lot of projects going on. So yes, I have written quite extensive notes because one of the things that I thought about when I actually started thinking about what would be the contents of this presentation is that another running theme throughout my life is that I have a terrible memory. I really don't remember anything, significant events and things from the past week, things like that. So it's an issue that I work through kind of constantly. So that's why I've kind of written everything down sort of year by year. So we're going to go through a little bit chronologically, hitting the things that I think might be relevant / useful to anyone who has been in a kind of similar position to where I was at the time, or to where I am now, and maybe informative to people who can't relate to that experience at all. So I'm going to start off with. Oh yeah, you've got the thing. Yeah, cool, you've got the thing, okay. I'm going to start off with this really beautiful picture of Bournemouth Beach. I thought I would start off with this because this is basically where I went after I completed my undergraduate degree in illustration at Middlesex University in London. So I finished my degree in illustration having been very kind of focused on doing creative work in my life. And found myself sort of at the end of it, as many people do, I would say, having completed creative degrees, finding the freelance work being a little bit of a slow process and not necessarily really knowing that much about how to market myself as a sort of independent company, which is kind of what you have to do when you're going into freelance work. So I returned to Bournemouth, my sort of hometown. I'm originally from Malaysia, but have lived in Bournemouth since about the age of 10, and did the whole job seekers process. I was like, I am a newly formed young adult and I don't really know what to do, so I did that. I ended up working in a software company with an entry-level sales role, which was really strange and really surreal and absolutely not something that I ever saw myself doing. But what I found out about it was that unexpectedly, the working culture was just brilliant. And it was really strange because it was a very odd kind of setup and something that was completely unfamiliar to me. And I remember feeling particularly nervous about the fact that actually all of my experiences so far had basically been getting to know other people who had kind of gone through the sort of art college route and were sort of creative types around the same age as me, all kind of very liberal and artsy, I guess. And I sort of had this nervousness about going into what I thought of as like an actual company and meeting all of these people kind of from all different walks of life. What I learned incredibly quickly, if we go to the next slide, are the few key takeaways that I'm going to kind of read out as we go through here. So the first one is, with a genuinely diverse group of people around you, you are so much more likely to learn really cool stuff. And I think that was the first point in my life where I noticed that and experienced, working for a really multicultural company that had offices all over the world. It was brilliant to be working with people across different countries, time zones, and just completely different walks of life. And the second one is be positive about new situations because it saves you time and energy. It was a situation that I initially felt really negative about, and I think I do remember the feeling of kind of getting through those first 2 weeks and thinking like, what on earth am I doing? And then once I just forced myself to be a bit more positive about it, I found myself really enjoying it. So I stayed there for nearly a year. I think I look back on that time as being an experience where I learnt the most sort of employable skills that I was then able to take with me into the next things I did. It taught me a lot about communication, it taught me everything about team working, and an awful lot about software. I have an extensive knowledge of telecom solutions from 2015 that is completely useless because everything became redundant when COVID hit. And I'm not going to go off on that tangent, but basically telephony now is very different to what they thought it would be about however many years ago that was, like 8 years ago, obviously. So I look back on that time as like quite a positive time, a time when I hello, I'm just going to wave to these people because there's people in there. A time when I learnt a lot of stuff. Hello. Hi, welcome. A time when I learnt a lot of stuff about, being in a workplace, getting on with people. I found myself mostly having those introductory conversations just about things like Game of Thrones or the weather or the traffic, because I didn't really know, those are the kind of things that you have to talk about when you first start working in an office, I guess. But what I often forget to mention, I think, when I think about that time, is that I was actually really depressed. And this was a really strange kind of thing because I'd never really encountered it before, but it was one of those odd experiences where I just slowly realised that I was really having trouble sort of getting out of bed. I was feeling incredibly tired and lethargic. I just wanted to go to sleep all the time, and I didn't really know how to plan for the future or really have any kind of thoughts about what would happen next. I was absolutely in this bizarre sort of funk for several months, and I remember going to doctors about it and dealing with it in that way and things like that. And I started going to the gym for the first time in my life because I thought that might help, and to be honest it actually did. It's quite useful, but then I think I don't really know how to explain the next part. I'll go to the next slide, but I feel a really significant turning point in my life was that one day when I was having breakfast and getting ready for work, I turned on the news and David Bowie had died. For some reason, this was the thing that actually made me really, I don't know, it just really affected me. It was one of those things I hadn't really kind of experienced a strong feeling about anything in particular for quite a long time. And when this happened, I'm a huge David Bowie fan, if that helps. It's not like I had never really thought about him before. I was very sad, and I just thought I actually need to get on with my life and start making some decisions. So I went to work that day, and I said to my boss, I think I'm going to have to hand in my notice pretty soon. And I looked up first any sort of late entry applications to illustration courses, because I suddenly thought, why am I not doing any illustration at the moment? Why am I not doing any creative work? I think that's what's making me sad. And Anglia Ruskin had a very good illustration masters available, which I applied to, and the application process was incredibly smooth, and the staff here were incredibly supportive in just sort of being yeah, that's fine. I went and showed everyone my portfolio, and they were like, great, yep, come through. So I left the job and moved to Cambridge. And that brings me on to, I guess, 2016/2017. Oh, I think I've also forgotten to go back to this recurring theme of the presentation, which is a surprising gut feeling is often a good one. For me, that was having the sudden impulse to move house and leave my job, which I think you can't do all the time, but every so often it's quite important. And also, mental illness is real. No, really. I think I didn't realise that up until that moment. So the next part is 2017. I came to Anglia Ruskin. I had an excellent time. I immediately made lots of friends here. I didn't know anyone else in Cambridge, and I also had the opportunity to join in with so many new things, there was a choir, a chamber choir, a musical theatre society, things like that I did that year, just packed everything into 1 year, and we did loads of exhibitions and stuff like that, and it was absolutely great. I was also working very solidly at the time, and I would say that when people come to me now and say that they want to do their masters while they're carrying on with their job, I say please do your masters part-time, because it was nearly impossible to do it full-time while holding down what was basically a full-time job at the same time. So this is actually the view, the first view that I remember being really amazed by when I moved here, because I lived just across the river and would come in and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I live in a postcard, this is crazy. I'd never been to Cambridge before, I didn't know anything about it. And I didn't know about the university, so like learning about that as I moved here was a very strange experience. So I'm going to Anglia Ruskin, and I am then sort of trying a lot of new things and having a relatively good time. I'll go to the next one. And I think the things I learned there is that being a newcomer is a really good opportunity to act without inhibition. Similarly, joining theatre societies and stuff is another good opportunity to act without inhibition, and I think that can be very healthy for you, sort of creatively. It's another thing that I think I've kind of taken from that time and try to remember as I go through other points in my life when I get perhaps a little bit stuck. So the next part, I will go over very quickly. I left Anglia Ruskin and continued my career path, which at the time was being a manager in a cocktail bar. I loved working in a cocktail bar. It was absolutely great, but you become entirely nocturnal. And you don't have friends that work in the daytime. So it kind of limits you socially, and I remember having conversations with people who were sort of saying like, I've just been doing this for ages and I wish I'd, had kids or done something else, but I'm just sort of in this habit of doing this work. And I did kind of think about that, but at the time I think I was still in this place where I was a bit like, I've got all these creative skills, I'm enjoying doing freelance work, and I was doing a lot of freelance work at the time. Because there was a lot of stuff going on. I was also teaching life drawing, working on some film productions, and doing the odd bit of graphic design here and there. But the main thing was that I was working in this cocktail bar, and I just thought, well, that's my life now. This is my main skill, and I'm going to continue this. I think I wasn't quite happy, but it was quite a fast pace of doing things, so there wasn't really time to reflect on it. So the only reflection I have from that period of my life is the following: beer before wine, feeling fine. Allegedly. So the next thing, I guess, is where things start to change for me. I just saw an advert for a job at the Fitzwilliam Museum as a front of house host, and I thought, oh my goodness, imagine leaving work at 5 p.m. It would still be light outside, and the idea of that was absolutely delightful. So I went for it, and I just kind of, made the most of my customer service skills and sort of said, I'm good at talking to people, I like talking to people, I'm also very interested in art, and I don't really know much about history. I learned so much about history in the first year that I worked there, including when ancient Egypt was, which I never knew before, and also a lot of stuff about the Victorians, which I also never knew before. So that was a really nice time, and the first part of that year was basically just enjoying it and, enjoying having a new group of people to talk to, enjoying working in this really beautiful building, and enjoying working 9 to 5. After about a year of doing that, I started to feel like actually I had managed to find the kind of space to think about what it was that I might want to be doing. At the same time, there were so many different opportunities that were kind of just seemed to be making themselves available within the museum and within the wider museums consortium, which goes across the University of Cambridge museums. So there's 8 of those museums, and including the Botanic Garden. One of the things that came up was a volunteering opportunity to lead tours within the museums around the topic of LGBTQ related history. So having actually kind of written extensively on the subject of LGBTQ plus artists in my dissertation and my master's dissertation, I was like, actually, I know a little bit about this. But then when I started doing it, I was like, but I also fundamentally don't know honestly anything about history, especially British history. So that was a bit of a steep learning curve to actually learn the content. But when I started doing it, I absolutely loved it. It was just fascinating to be able to go around the collection and tell stories that were generally not, just not written on the labels. People don't tend to say when they are writing these labels, some of these labels have been around for, up to 200 years, and they're kind of not going to mention any of the sort of other stories, whether that's kind of personal stories or whether that is the significance of an item throughout history to queer communities. It's not really going to be there. So actually highlighting those things to people and being able to talk about it was a fantastic project to work on. And in doing so, I met so many amazing people working in similar situations in other museums, and spoke to lots of different people about it. And we had a guy working with us who was just I think, the most incredible networker I have ever met, who managed to get news stories about it put in the Times, and also the New York Times, which I don't really know why, because obviously, like, you know, I don't know if anyone actually read that and thought, yeah, I'll go all the way to Cambridge in England and see this. But it was quite it was a really good time, and really good to kind of be able to talk about that stuff. The other thing that happened sort of as a result of that was that I was asked to join, so I think I'd already joined a thing called the Changemakers Network. So this, as I mentioned before, is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group that works across all of the University of Cambridge museums. And I think what I didn't realise at the time was actually that it's a little bit, the great thing about Changemakers is that it works independently of the museums and independently of the university. So it's not necessarily bound by the kind of restrictions of the university, and you don't necessarily have to go through boards to have things approved. It does work as an action group. So at the end of that year, I found another opportunity to move up into a management role, which is actually the role that I'm still in today. And I took that as I felt that it was time to move on. So I'll go to the next thing. And yes, my key takeaway there is volunteer while you have the time and energy, because it can lead to incredible things. I still say this because I do work with a lot of volunteers now. I feel right now, this moment, that I don't have the time and energy to volunteer, but I have done in the last year when I've kind of been able to, and I would say that it was possibly the most useful thing for my career. I think a lot of people can be like a little bit against it because it is quite time consuming, and obviously like you need to focus on getting paid a lot of the time, but if you do have the capacity to do it and you can find something to do, it can be really, really helpful. So I would always recommend volunteering. I will go to the next thing. So this is going into 2019 and I suppose the beginning of 2020. This is a project that I worked on, which was picking up from the work of the LGBTQ plus tours. We started looking at objects around the rest of the museums that had different kinds of untold stories. So those were everything from stories of things that were kind of, you know, victims of colonialism, and stories that were about disability, stories, and obviously also stories that were about queer history. So we started to work on a project during this time called Museum Remix, where we basically got members of the community to come in and sort of reinterpret our objects from our collection and make suggestions on what those objects might say if they could talk, what the people behind them might say if they had a voice, and to think about what kind of voices we're missing in the narratives of, I suppose, our relatively Eurocentric collections within the museum today. So that was one of the projects I worked on. I just wanted to show a couple of examples. There's another one of some of the illustration work I ended up doing. So I did end up getting commissioned by the museum a couple of times for illustration work, which is really nice. And then I think the last picture is just of my cat. I think that is because this was a time when all of these great things were happening. I was trying to take all these opportunities, and I started to work in areas that I was really, really interested in. At the same time, I was having a really strange time at work, and the workplace, that my office in particular, was it was a little bit of a, I don't know if the right phrase is like a toxic environment, but it was a little bit, things got a little bit heavy and things were a little bit strange, and I didn't really know where to turn to for support with that, because I was kind of thinking, well, I should be grateful for the fact that I'm being able to do all of these amazing things that are sort of like adjacent to my work and outside of my work, but at the same time, every time I go back to this room, it's like a horrible environment and I feel really stressed and really sad. So for a long time I was sort of, I mean, I wouldn't say I was talking to my cat about it, but in some ways, maybe I was. I don't know. But I would say that going on to the next slide, the points of that, the one takeaway from 2019 was I have no words to describe the value of my cat's companionship, which I can say is absolutely true. So, moving on to 2020. I guess we all know what happened in 2020, and I suppose what happened to me was like as a result of and sort of caused by and related to. I actually forgot that I put this in here, but this is, oh wait, no, that's 2021. Have I missed a whole year? Maybe I've missed a whole year. Is there anything behind it? Oh, maybe I have missed a whole. I've missed a whole slide that describes the whole year. Well, I just guess we'll just have to imagine the picture and not skip ahead to that. But essentially, 2020 was probably the most important year in my career, I guess, because it was when. So first of all, there was COVID. There was a very difficult situation at work, which ended up with me sort of becoming a little bit untethered from any form of management and needing to sort of reach out to different sources of support. It was also the time when there was basically, as a result of the Black Lives Matter protests, there was a huge turn from many cultural institutions every institution, I suppose, as I guess everyone will probably remember, to thinking more about racial injustice and what their position was in that kind of area. This became really tricky because actually it was just really clumsily handled by lots of people. I don't know if anyone remembers around that time that there were a lot of organisations kind of making really abstract statements and vague commitments and not really sort of doing anything but kind of wanting to say something. I really experienced that at the time, and also felt a lot of pressure from the rest of the organisation on anyone who was already working in areas of equality, diversity and inclusion. We were very much expected to kind of take the weight of that and sort of think about, statements we could make or actions we could take and things like that. While some of the work that came out of that time as a result was incredibly good and has been really productive since then, it was tricky to sort of be in that position and to kind of feel the pressure of I suppose, like, I don't know, the rest of the organisation and other people sort of saying like, well, I don't know anything about this subject and you know loads about it, so like, you tell me what to say. And that's kind of complicated. And we also found, I remember I had another colleague at the time, another Asian woman, and she was saying, does it feel like they're just asking just me and you to talk about this stuff as Asian people, because that's really strange and feels really uncomfortable. She recommended that I get in touch with an organisation called Museum Detox, which is basically a nationwide network of people of colour who work in arts and heritage organisations. They also have expanded a little bit internationally as well, I think, at this point. And I had never really joined a network or been part of any kind of large group like that before. And I was a bit like, oh, I don't know if I want to get involved in a whole thing with like hundreds of people. But I joined it because it was a relatively easy process. And within like a couple of days, the sort of enormous kind of lightness that I felt just reading about other people having very, very similar experiences in their organisations was kind of amazing. And I think being able to feel that you could talk to people who didn't necessarily know what was going on in your individual organisation and just say like, I'm having this experience, is anyone else having this experience? And for people to say like, yes, we are all having this experience. It's very weird and it's also a very difficult time. So that was a major turning point for me, I think. There was also kind of going alongside that, the COVID situation meant that most people were working from home. I, for some reason, ended up working on site as one of the key holding people. So my work was simultaneously like possibly a bit more exciting than like people who like were working from home, because lots of people were saying, I'm so jealous, you have a special letter that allows you to like cycle through town and go into a building. But at the same time, I would go to the building and be completely on my own, and it was like people always say, like, was it like Night at the Museum? It was exactly like Night at the Museum. It was completely dark and slightly strange. So that was happening at the same time. And finally, towards the end of that year, I think all of the kind of situations that had gone on around that time were compounding and led me to finally seek workplace counselling. This was mainly about the sort of management issue that I was having at the time, and feeling a little bit set adrift by everything that was going on at the museum. But that was the point where I thought actually that was just incredibly valuable. I think it's very tempting in kind of stressful situations to think about, where those sources of support are, and I suppose there is the possibility of offloading to friends and family, but actually, like, a lot of the time, if you're talking about work stuff, it's just really boring, and then you can't really talk to colleagues because it's all confidential. And so that was basically what led me to seeking workplace counselling, and I have to say it was absolutely great. So I would recommend to anyone that you kind of identify those potential outlets for support and places that you can go to talk to people.
Jasmine.
Yes.
Sorry, can I just ask you to step back a little bit because
Oh,
people
yeah.
online can't see you there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Much appreciated.
So we are at 2021. So 2021, I broke my elbow immediately in January. And actually, I think this was probably one of the best things I've ever done because it forced me to take an actual break and rest and stop doing anything because I couldn't type. So I couldn't really do anything. And I just stopped working for about a month. And it was like the first time that I was kind of completely relaxed after a while. It was really strange, and I think I was very nervous that the kind of issues I'd had with depression would sort of come back if I stopped doing everything. But actually, it was fine. It was absolutely fine, and then my elbow got better, and I started roller skating again. So that was how that started. I think we can go to the next slide. So the next thing that happened in 2021, we reopened the museum, and we go to everything being kind of slightly back to normal, but with a lot of restrictions obviously in place. The year prior, I had also applied for something called the Claw Leadership course. When I did this, it was pretty speculative, and I thought this seems like the kind of thing that I don't know, that is not really for me, that I won't get into, but I ended up getting in, which was great. And I went in 2021, and I use this picture because this is of the cohort that I was with, and you can actually see me, but I'm there in the background. So I couldn't find a picture of myself doing it. It was really good because it was an experience where the whole conversation was about finding your sort of individual leadership style and feeling kind of a little bit more confident in your leadership. Everyone there was pretty much at the same sort of stage in their careers, and I absolutely went in with the biggest sort of nervousness and imposter syndrome I think I've ever experienced in my life, because I was like, why are they sending me to this place with all of these amazing, creative leaders when I am a little baby? So I went in and I discovered almost immediately that everyone else was equally as nervous. Everyone else felt that they still hadn't found their career path. Everyone else also felt that they didn't really know what they were doing, and that they were just kind of vaguely holding things together in a sort of very makeshift and roundabout way. The other thing that made me nervous was that I know that I struggle with listening. I've always struggled with listening. I struggled at university, that's why I did practical subjects, because I just knew in my heart that I could not make it through a lecture. It's been discovered that actually I may, according to my GP, I do have ADHD, which I suppose goes quite a long way to explain a lot of experiences in my life. But ahead of this, of doing this course, I was incredibly nervous about it, because I was like, they're sending me to a place where they're going to tell me loads of really interesting information, and I'm not going to take any of it in, and they're going to think I'm really annoying because I will just move around all the time and make sounds. When I went there, the first thing that happened was that we had to do an introductory, a round of introductions where everyone stood in two lines facing each other. So you've got two lines of 11 people standing very close to each other, and then you're facing another person, and then you are supposed to spend 3 minutes introducing yourself to the other person. So everyone starts talking, it's in an incredibly echoey room, and immediately I can't hear anything. I nearly started crying, but I didn't. Instead, I took a step back and just said, I have issues processing sound in environments like this. Can we just go outside? And the other person was like, oh, of course, yeah, that makes total sense. And then it was fine. So it was like this weird moment where I thought oh my God, I'm completely incapable of coping with this situation, but sort of had to pull myself together and make a request, which was actually very simple, and everyone was just fine with it, and the course went on like that, and it was very easy. So I think what I learned about that situation was absolutely ask for help, and I think that was also one of the most valuable experiences that I took with me out of that into my life at work when I came out. So the next thing that happened was that I sort of was given a lot more responsibility at work, ended up in a lot of situations where I was having to communicate with lots of senior people. This was something that historically had made me quite nervous, but actually having kind of established this set of boundaries and the understanding that it was possible for me to ask for help at different times, I felt a lot more able and comfortable with making those requests at work in those settings as well, and that just helped me immeasurably, and I have not looked back. So I think key takeaways here: no, genuinely ask for help. I've written nurture imagination, which I think might be related to something else that I may not have covered, but I'll go on to later. And third key takeaway is the Golden Dragon on Victoria Road. If anyone has been there, it's fantastic. So I will go to the last section, which I suppose is kind of now, and this is 2022. This was the campaign year that I launched with the Changemakers Action Group, which in late 2021 I was elected the chair of. So this was another kind of leadership role that enabled me to sort of like have the responsibility of leading a group, and I did feel a lot of responsibility to kind of make it good, and also to take us off the online space that we had been occupying because of COVID and into the real world and doing some real campaigning and some real kind of helpful change. So this was the campaign that we launched. That was basically a program of events and training, teaching the staff of the museum about allyship and the importance of it, and the strength in allyship, and the principles of sort of using your own privilege to act positively in the world. So I think that is so that's what's next. What is next? So this is the key takeaway from that time was a manifesto is a really good place to start. I started off the year with Changemakers writing a new manifesto and a mission statement. In the leadership course I did, they encouraged us all to write personal mission statements, and I thought that was just a very good exercise. I think about that constantly when people say, like, when I have to talk about kind of leadership as a concept, I start to think about, like, what are the things that are really, really important and valuable to you. I actually think that my mission statement is actually just be kind and polite, because I think in management, if you have to make a lot of difficult decisions, but at the end of the day, if you've basically been kind and polite, you've done the best you can. Or at least that's how I feel about things. So the next part is a picture that I think has gone in the wrong place, because that was about me sort of leading some talks. And this is some things that I'm working on currently with the museum. So I've just been hired to do some more freelance illustration work alongside my actual job. It's really nice because it enables me to kind of maintain that creative practice side of things. What I forgot to mention as well was that in 2021, I got really back into drawing. After the whole breaking my elbow scenario, I started thinking a lot more about my creative practice and how I'd kind of lost it. And having that time to rest did allow me to start thinking about, like, what that might look like in the future. I just started drawing for fun, and I didn't show anyone anything. And then after a while, I showed a couple of people some things. And then after a while, someone randomly contacted me and said, "Can you draw this for me?" And I was like, "Oh, actually, I might." So I did start doing freelance work again in 2021 and have kind of continued that since. The other thing that I think is also important to mention is that while I do enjoy my job, and I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about, like, all of these things and, like, what I suppose I want my leadership to look like, and also, like, what we can do as a group within the university museums, and what we can do in our community to kind of further any of our aims in the realm of sort of equality, diversity and inclusion. I also think that the thing that I've learned mostly from that last sort of period of 5 years or so is that is the need to kind of balance that with other stuff where you don't really think about anything. And for me, that is ice skating, and finally roller skating. Those things are very important. They're very reflective moments in my life, and I try to do them both whenever I can. So I think that is basically everything that I have to say at this moment. So thank you for listening.